of this general election campaign for both parties. On the campaign trail, the Green Party launches its manifesto, but is warned against its £70 billion tax hike on the wealthy. Also tonight on Sky News at 10, Sky News speaks to the family of an Israeli hostage rescued from Gaza. Jurors in the new Lucy Letby trial have been told her previous convictions should be taken into account as an important piece of evidence. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Good evening and welcome to this very special Sky News at 10, live from Grimsby. Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer have been trying to convince voters that they should get your vote in the upcoming general election. They've been questioned by audience members and by Sky's political editor Beth Rigby about tax, the NHS and immigration. Sir Keir Starmer insisted he would not be raising taxes to fix public finances. He also promised to sit down and negotiate with the NHS. Rishi Sunak acknowledged that people were frustrated over immigration numbers since Brexit, but did give a date for the first flight to Rwanda. Coming up, we'll be hearing from the audience. We'll be testing out some of the claims made by the leaders, and we'll be bringing you the details of that poll to find out who came out on top. But first, Sky's deputy political editor Sam Coates reports now on the battle for number 10.
200 miles from Downing Street, the battle for number 10 now playing out in Grimsby. The two men vying for the keys to that door know they need to win voters like these. This place voted Tory last time, but now Labour wants it back. Keir Starmer first up to be interviewed by Sky's political editor Beth Rigby. He wants to convince this audience and the country he can be trusted. But it's a long journey since his last election campaign.
You said, I do think Jeremy Corbyn would make a great Prime Minister. Jeremy Corbyn, did you mean that?
I was certain that we would lose the 2019 election.
Did you not mean it when you said it?
I was certain that we would lose.
Now will you actually say, yes, I thought that, or I didn't think that at the time? Just be honest.
I honestly didn't think that we had a chance of winning that election.
So you said it anyway.
Tax, a constant issue in this campaign. Do Labour's plans add up?
But the Tories say you will go further. They're right, aren't they? You will.
Well, the first thing I'd say is the Tories are in no position to lecture anyone about tax rises. We got the highest tax burden.
So, no tax rises in the next Parliament?
No tax rises needed in the plans in our manifesto.
In the plans?
No tax rises for working people. That's income tax, national insurance,
so you're
and VAT.
not ruling out. I just decode that for you guys, because when a politician says no plans, it does mean I might.
Well, Beth,
I've done this a bit. It does.
No plans for a wealth tax, but he is a top earner himself.
Would you personally be happy to pay more tax?
Yes, of course.
A hint of domestic life and personal troubles.
Was Vic, your wife, not keen for you to do this?
No, she wasn't at all. She
What
thought
does she think
it'd be
about
far
the
better to
prospect of
continue
you?
being a lawyer on a reasonable salary and not have all of the challenges that you get as a politician. But I was clear in my mind. I wanted to come into politics because I wanted to serve my country.
The audience asking questions too, and some not holding back.
Over the last year, I feel like you've formed into more of a politician than the person that I would have voted for to run the country. You seem more like a political robot. How are you going to convince others like me to vote for you?
Well, the most... look, all I can say... I went to run the Crown Prosecution Service. You referenced that. I was the Chief Prosecutor for 5 years. Apologies.
Cayman, did he convince you, yes or no?
I hope you don't answer the questions how you answer the questions, and I hope you never answered them the way that you did when you were a solicitor, because you don't seem to answer the question.
OK. I'm gonna...
Some frustration at the lack of detail, but this man not giving much away. Rishi Sunak needs a big win in this room and beyond. But can he escape the chaotic record of his party?
In this parliament, we've had 3 prime ministers, 5 chancellors, 5 home secretaries, 6 health secretaries. How do we know that if you won the general election, you'd still be prime minister in a year's time?
Look, I can appreciate people's frustrations. Of course, we haven't got everything right. I don't think any government does, and I know it's been very difficult for many people. But what I can do is work as hard as I can to deliver the stability that I said I would, and I've had this job for 18 months.
The PM tested like rarely before on his promises. One, to get waiting lists down.
No, just cutting NHS waiting lists, that's pledge 4. When you made the promise, the list was at 7.21 million. It's now at 7.54 million cases. It's gone up.
Yes, it has. Yes, I'm very good. We've not made as much progress on cutting waiting lists as I would have liked.
The point...
Rishi Sunak facing boos, losing some in the crowd and, at times, looking crestfallen. Immigration, the next challenge for him to overcome.
Why did you call an election before voters could actually see it was happening? Why?
Because an election is an important moment for our country, and my priority when I got this job was to restore economic stability. And we talked about bringing inflation down and getting the economy growing, and then being in a position, as we are now, to cut people's taxes.
Legal immigration, another example of failure. And again, the audience hostile.
What was the total net migration figure in the last 3 years running up to the 2016 referendum when we had freedom of movement? Do you know it?
I don't have it offhand.
It was 836,000 people. And I'm sure many people in this room would have voted for Brexit. 70% of people in Grimsby voted for Brexit. How do you think they feel about that when they hear that net migration into this country has more than doubled in the last 3 years from before we left the European Union?
Yeah, I'm sure people... It's too high. I've been very clear that it's too high. And I'm sure people feel frustrated and angry about it.
Trying to show he gets it. But after 14 years in power, the audience seemed low on patience.
You say that you're coming from an NHS background and you have this instilled value of caring for the NHS. How are we going to do that if you try and undermine it at every level?
With greatest respect, that's not what we're doing. We're investing record sums into it. We're training more doctors and nurses than we ever have, and there are more doctors and nurses in the NHS today than it's also had.
Because there's shortages of the staff already. We're short of radiographers, all the trades, all the different specialities throughout the hospitals. We're short of staff. So building another building that's going to move it from the hospital is not going to cure the problem. It's just going to make it worse.
Perfect.
It was a bruising experience for the Prime Minister. His campaign needed a win, but it didn't come here.
An exclusive Snap poll suggests a decisive verdict. 64% said that Keir Starmer won, just 36% said Rishi Sunak, not the result the Prime Minister needed.
Halfway through this campaign, tonight a major moment. Both sides will try to claim their man won, but the reactions in the room and from the viewing public tell a different story. Can Rishi Sunak turn it around from here? Sam Coates, Sky News, Grimsby.
So, who won? YouGov, as you've heard, have already done their polling, and here it is. The question was, leaving aside your own party preference, who do you think performed best overall in tonight's televised leaders event? 36% Rishi Sunak, 64% Sir Keir Starmer. Well, as we saw tonight, we had a live studio audience made up of people who live locally and those who travelled for the event. Great Grimsby and Cleethorpes is a key battleground for the Conservatives and for Labour. It could create a swing that can impact the outcome of the election. Sky's national correspondent Tom Parminter has spent the last few weeks here finding out what matters most to the people. And today, he's been gauging the audience response before and after we heard from Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer.
Who would walk into Grimsby Town Hall and really test the leaders? Members of the public looking for straight answers.
I really care about Grimsby, and I'm tired of the inequalities that we're experiencing. And I'm tired about the fact that we seem to have been forgotten, and that needs to change.
Things aren't going well in so many different areas. The NHS, care, housing, mortgages, cost of living, it's all impacting real people, my family included.
People were drawn from across the nation.
I'm undecided, and I feel like a lot of the country is undecided. So I just think these are opportunities they really need to grasp.
You used to be very loyal to the Conservative Party, but
absolutely,
for you that's gone?
Yeah, gone completely. I would really like to come out of the debate tonight knowing who I'm going to vote for, but I have come with an open mind to try and see if these two gentlemen can convince me who should be the next leader of the country.
Everyone wanted their say, but inside, the audience had the chance to come face to face with the two men vying to become Prime Minister. As they left, we caught up with them.
And one thing I was impressed is when Keir Starmer did say that he would like to, we need to bring it back to local level. We need to bring it to help local councils and that make those decisions rather than central government dictating all the time what we should be doing.
So who won the battle here?
I think the people, not to sound, political, but they asked the questions that they wanted to ask, and the answers that these two gave will decide what people want to vote for.
You were part of a very unforgiving audience there.
We were. It was hard for both of them, and I appreciate what they did. And I also think the format was so much better in having them not shouting over the top of each other. We did actually get to the humanity of them a little bit and hear a little bit more. And perhaps you read between the lines of the things they don't answer.
Many were left wanting more.
For you, the battle for number 10
is still on.
It's still on?
It's still on for me, yeah, absolutely.
This was a tough crowd. For some, it has made a difference. Just 3 weeks before the nation decides. Tom Parmenter, Sky News, Grimsby.
Well, our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, joins me now. And Sam, you've been here throughout the course of the day. Just how important was tonight for both men?
Look, I think, Gillian, we had a really critical campaign moment this evening. Look, first we saw from Keir Starmer, and we did learn things about him. We saw his determination not to give very much more away, but in the context of somebody who has changed his mind repeatedly as a politician. So I think the interview with my colleague Beth Rigby drew out the question, are we really sure what a Keir Starmer premiership would look like? But for me, the transformative moment of tonight was the performance of the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, whether it was the reaction of those in the room, the reaction of those viewers at home that decisively decided that he was not the winner by a 2-1 margin, or even just the look on his face. You'll have seen now the pictures of Rishi Sunak looking almost haunted, perhaps crestfallen. He really struggled on questions of his own priorities and his own delivery and his own promises. And I think it was very instructive to watch the way that he handled that. And you could feel the audience uncomfortable with the answers and wanting to push back about the way that he was doing it. I felt that Rishi Sunak knew that too. And at points it was a painful watch. We are exactly halfway through this general election campaign right now, Gillian, and I'm really starting to wonder if after that, in that room behind us, in that town hall, Rishi Sunak can do anything to pull back this election campaign.
Would you go as far as to say that he seemed to be a broken man?
I think I would encourage every viewer to watch the slightly haunted figure that we saw on that very big stage today and draw their own conclusions. I think the evidence was there across 45 minutes, and the verdict of our viewers was clear. It feels really hard to see him instilling the confidence that you would need to be to continue in the job as Prime Minister after what we witnessed tonight.
OK, Sam, thanks very much for the moment, but do stay right here next to me. We're going to stay with Stan when we come back, but I want to get more of our analysis now. Ed Conway is at the screen tonight. And Ed, there was a focus on tax for both party leaders, wasn't there?
Yeah, there was a big focus on tax. It's interesting, there wasn't like one single number that dominated this like it did in the first time they debated that £2,000 figure. But tax was this issue that kept coming up actually for both of the candidates that you saw today. One interesting thing, the Prime Minister saying that he wasn't aware of this analysis, which is strange because we've been showing it for the last 24 hours. I know it's well thought of. Or at least it's been considered in Conservative Party headquarters. This is showing you the tax burden in the UK, OK? It goes all the way back to the 1940s. The higher this line is, the more we are taxed. And it's every tax. You know, it's national insurance, it's VAT, it's the whole lot. It goes up a lot after the energy price shock and COVID. It's forecast to go higher in the next few years. We just had the Conservative manifesto. And the key issue, the key question really is whether those tax cuts talked about in the manifesto are going to bring that line so it starts going down. But actually, when you look at them, they're not. It's still going up, albeit less sharply than it is before, albeit not quite as steeply. But nonetheless, if you draw a line between where it gets to and back in history, this is the highest level it's going to be since the 1940s. So even after all of those manifesto pledges, it's worth saying a few other things that the Prime Minister talked about as well that's worth just kind of discussing. First of all, he talked about migration, saying that they were bringing down migration, this government. Well, if you look at what's happened to migration, I think for a lot of people it won't quite feel like that. When those Brexit rules, post-Brexit rules came into force, there was a very big increase in migration. And that's last year's estimate. It's been upgraded since then and upgraded again. So while it's certainly true it's coming down, it keeps getting revised ever higher. So there's a bit of caution about that. And there was a little bit, I don't know if I go so far as saying a porky pie, but it's one of those statistical things that you've got to be a bit cautious about. When the Prime Minister was talking about a record number of police officers, yeah, it's true in terms of the total number of police officers. Look, this bar here, the higher the bars are, the more police officers, that bar is definitely the highest on record, or at least going back to 2010. But adjust it by the numbers of people in the population. Look at this. We're going to do that adjustment. So that's per 1,000 head of the population. And now look at this line. OK, we'll go back, 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 back. Oh, actually, it was higher pre-austerity. OK, so there were a few things to pick out there. But even when it came to Keir Starmer as well, some question marks in particular about tax and about spending. A big question I think that Beth talked about is which taxes would you rise if you need to raise spending? And essentially, Keir Starmer saying he didn't want to raise the rates of income tax, national insurance, VAT. Obviously, there's question marks about whether you're going to be raising the total amount you're getting from it. But if you knock those out, where is Labour actually going to raise those taxes? Obviously, we're going to get their manifesto tomorrow, so we might hear more about it. But that's why people are wondering about things like capital gains tax. They're wondering about fuel duties because there's only so many things you can actually raise. But you do potentially need to raise them because there is a big, some people call it conspiracy of silence, there's a big hole in the spending numbers in the future. While it looks like there's big increases in spending, well, relatively big increases in spending, and while it looks like protected parts of government have big increases in the coming years, the unprotected parts of government, this is based on the numbers that we already have in the Office of Budget Responsibility, are very, very poor. A big fall of 3.5% following 20% real terms cuts before. So there is still some extra spending needed to be found if you're going to bring spending back to levels that is going to improve public services. So still some big questions for Keir Starmer. Obviously, we get the manifesto from the Labour Party and we'll bring you the full analysis of that as well.
Ed, thank you. He didn't go as far as porky pies, but almost. Sam, still with me. Sam, what did we get to know about the vision for both potential governments, both sides?
I think what we learned is that when it comes to that manifesto detail for both sides, we're in the middle of manifesto week, the public are paying really, really close attention. And the way that Rishi Sunak handled it and the audience reaction was really instructive. There were boos when he blamed the junior doctors for waiting lists. There was disbelief when Beth Rigby read out the immigration figures all these years after Brexit when migration was meant to be taken back, we were meant to take back control of immigration. And there was disbelief again when Rishi Sunak tried to sort of reframe his promises on debt to say he would meet them in 5 years' time. I can tell you, I checked the original speech, that was never the promise. All of that went down very badly with the audience, and it's quite clear that the precision promises of politicians are really important. So let's look at Keir Starmer, because at the moment, it's his to lose still, and that debate's done nothing to change that. And he was really, really cautious, not just what he said, but what he didn't say. And it's quite clear from that interview with Beth Rigby that there is huge scope, actually, for Labour, for instance, to put up taxes, as as Ed was saying. There was a great line from my colleague, you know, when you say you have no plans, that means you might well. And I think whether it's fuel duty, whether it's capital gains tax, it feels like whether it's council tax reevaluation, what we saw today was Keir Starmer refusing to rule those out. If there is the kind of black hole that Ed was just talking about, I think we learnt tonight those options, raising those taxes, very much on the table.
OK, Sam, thank you so much for your analysis. Thank you. Well, elsewhere on the campaign trail, the Green Party has launched its manifesto today and promised a £70 billion tax hike on the rich to fund the NHS. But the Institute for Fiscal Studies warns the party's tax plans would disincentivise work and investment and could increase borrowing by around £80 billion a year. Sky's political correspondent Gurpreet Narwan reports now on the Greens' pitch to the voters.
A break from the past, with a fairer tax system to fund public services. That's the pitch from the Greens.
We would overhaul our tax system to make it fairer. At the heart of this would be a tax on the very richest, the top 1% of people. Greens have the courage to say that we would change the tax system to make it fairer and make this investment possible.
These are significant numbers, £170 billion a year, and not just for the richest.
The changes to national insurance mean that people earning over £50,000 a year will be paying more tax. That's 1 in 5 taxpayers. How do you justify that in a cost of living crisis?
The cost of that for somebody on £55,000 a year would be an extra £5 a week. People earning under £50,000 would not be affected. So we are asking modestly more, but we think it's, for people on middle incomes, a modest amount that's affordable and that is going to enable us to invest.
But the party's been dogged by rows beyond tax and spend, with multiple candidates investigated after sharing offensive posts online since October the 7th.
There is no place for anti-Semitism in our society or in any political party. Where cases were brought to the party's attention, those were thoroughly investigated and appropriate actions taken by that independent process. There have been some cases that have, I'm concerned, have conflated anti-Semitism with criticism of actions of the Israeli government.
Brighton Pavilion is the only seat the Greens currently hold. They have a near 20,000 majority. But voters here aren't all convinced.
They're useless. As simple as that.
I do like what they're trying to do, I must admit. So, yeah, I'm all for what they do.
So I think I voted for Jeremy Corbyn, for Labour, but yeah, I'd vote for Green Party.
The party says it's realistic about its prospects. There won't be many seats, but the Green wave is sweeping up disaffected voters from both the left and the right. Gurpreet Narwan, Sky News, Brighton.
Well, let's just take you through a list now of all the candidates standing in the Brighton Pavilion seat. In other news, the United States Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, has said that some of Hamas's demands to change the ceasefire deal are unworkable. That's after Hamas said it wants written guarantees from the US. The UN voted in favour of the framework devised by President Biden this week, just days after 4 hostages were rescued from Gaza. Sky News has been speaking to the parents of one of the freed hostages. His rescue was filmed in dramatic footage released by Israeli forces. Sky's Middle East correspondent Alistair Bunkle reports.
After 8 months of hoping that he was still alive, but hearing nothing about his condition or whereabouts, Andrei Kozlov's parents simply couldn't believe it when they got the call to say he'd been rescued and was on a helicopter out of Gaza.
When I heard, "Are you sitting down?" I thought it was bad news. I dropped the phone to one side. It fell under the table, and suddenly I heard from under the table, "It's good news, it's good news." And I crawled under the table. "Did you say good news?" "Yes, they're bringing Andrei over by helicopter. He's almost in Israel."
It was very emotional. It's difficult to describe.
Evgenia and Mikhail flew straight from St. Petersburg in Russia for an emotional reunion with Andriy at a hospital in Israel. It appeared to be the moment his ordeal finally caught up with him.
During the 8 months we've been waiting for him, we feared he would be changed a lot, that he would be a different man. And suddenly there was this emotional shock. Mama, Mama, I knew I'd return. Mama, I knew on October 7th that I would go home. When he calmed down and was able to speak calmly, I knew he was the same man.
Andriy was rescued with 2 Israeli men, Almog Jan and Shlomi Ziv, in an Israeli military operation in central Gaza on Saturday morning.
What has he told you about the last 8 months?
One of the phrases that really scared or hurt us was when he said, "There are some things I will never tell you about." As for everything else, yes, he tells us, but it's as if he's playing storyteller, as if to entertain us. Even the fact that his hands and feet were tied for 2 months, he tells it as if it were a joke.
Hamas claims that at least 270 Gazans were killed and hundreds wounded in the rescue operation. Video from the scene shows many dead in the densely populated Nuzorat market. Hamas now says it wants written guarantees from the US before agreeing a ceasefire deal. But the US Secretary of State in Qatar today said some of Hamas's demands aren't possible.
Hamas has proposed numerous changes to the proposal that was on the table. Some of the changes are workable, some are not. Here, in a nutshell, is where we stand.
For all the hostages who have returned home, like Andriy, 120 still remain in Gaza, many of them dead. Negotiations for their release continue, but hopes for a ceasefire are, again, fading. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News, in Tel Aviv.
Jurors in the retrial of Lucy Letby have been told her previous conviction should be taken into account as an important piece of evidence. The former nurse is accused of the attempted murder of a baby girl known as Child K. She's already serving a whole life sentence for the murder of 7 babies and the attempted murder of 6 others. Sky's chief North of England correspondent Greg Milam reports.
It is Lucy Letby's status as a multiple murderer and attempted murderer of 13 babies that prosecutors say is an important piece of evidence for the jury in deciding whether she tried to kill a 14th. Born extremely prematurely, the baby identified as Child K had been stable in the neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester Hospital when her condition suddenly worsened. Consultant Dr. Ravi Jayaram walked into the room and found Lucy Letby standing over the baby. Alarms which should have been going off were not. Lucy Letby was doing nothing. The prosecution say the baby's breathing tube had been displaced. Nick Johnson, KC, said the fact Lucy Letby was doing nothing and that the alarm was not sounding is evidence that Lucy Letby, the convicted murderer, had displaced the tube. Mr. Johnson told the jury that the baby suffered 2 further collapses that night, attempts, he said, by Lucy Letby to create the impression, having been caught almost red-handed, that the baby habitually displaced its own breathing tube. Baby K died 3 days later. The prosecution say they're not suggesting Lucy Letby's actions caused that death, but they are suggesting that she did try to kill her. It happened after she'd already murdered 5 babies and before she murdered 2 more. Significant evidence, the prosecution say, of her intention. Ben Myers, KC, defending Lucy Letby, said she was being blamed wrongly for the death of a baby who was clinically fragile. A jury was unable to reach a verdict on this allegation at Lucy Letby's previous trial. She denies attempted murder. Greg Milam, Sky News, Manchester Crown Court.
Coming up shortly, we'll have the press preview where I'll be joined by our guest, The Sun's chief political correspondent, Jack Elsom, and Sky's election commentator, Adam Bolton. But let's quickly get their first impressions of tonight's event. To you, first of all, Jack, what did you think about the performance of both men, about how they were received by the audience?
Well, I think it was just that. I think that the audience's reaction had the standout moments of the night. It was probably the rawest reflection of the mood in the country we've seen so far throughout the campaign here in Grimsby. Huge frustration at the Conservative Party after 14 years of government. Not a massive appetite for Keir Starmer and his vision. Both of them had their bruises punched. Sunak on the NHS, migration, Starmer on possible tax rises and his association with Jeremy Corbyn. The question is whether or not it shifted the dial at all at the moment.
Adam, who do you think came out on top?
Well, I think on balance, the Snap poll, which suggests about 2/3 gave it to Keir Starmer, is probably a fair reflection, not least because of where public opinion was beforehand, which was probably reinforced because we had a lot of the Prime Minister just having to defend the record of the last 14 years and actually making some concessions he hadn't made before about NHS waiting lists and about the boats in particular. But, what was really interesting were the moments where the audience really stumped them both. A lot of people remember for a long time Keir Starmer being accused of being a bit of a political robot and giving a very robotic reply.
Do you think that we learnt anything new, Jack?
Not really, I don't think. Both of them at the moment have got their messages. I thought it was interesting how Rishi Sunak didn't deploy his £2,000 attack on Labour, which he was very keen to do last week. Keir Starmer obviously playing a huge safety-first strategy at the moment. He does not want any chinks in his armour for the Tories to go after. So for him, it was rinse and repeat, more of the same.
Rinse and repeat. Thank you both for the moment. Going to hear much more from you later on. Adam and Jack will be staying with us right the way through to midnight for our press preview and news review. That's it for Sky News at 10, live from Grimsby.
The stage is set for the battle for number 10.
We're joined tonight by the two men vying for the keys to Downing Street, Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer. You were looking at wealth taxes. You are looking at wealth taxes. It's OK to say it.
We're not looking at wealth taxes.
Promise number 3, reducing national debt. It's gone up since you made the pledge, hasn't it? It has.
Yes, yeah. But it was always meant to come down over time.
The Tories are in no position to lecture anyone about tax rises.
I can appreciate people's frustrations. Of course, we haven't got everything right.
When I grew up, my dad was a toolmaker. He worked in a factory. It's true.
I've got a plan about what I want to do.
And I'm going to come on to that.
Keir Starmer doesn't agree with that plan.
Okay.
We're in the spin room. You can see the spin happening as we speak.
We have got Treasury officials to
crunch. Not this again.
I didn't interrupt you, Wes.
We really hope our programme this evening has helped you make up your mind.
This is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories. Sir Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak have been trying to convince voters that they should get their vote in the upcoming general election at a special Sky News event. The audience in the key target town of Grimsby challenged both men on their main concerns. A snap poll by YouGov suggests nearly 2/3 of those asked believe the Labour leader performed best. Hello there, you are watching the press preview live from Grimsby. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. Well, it's time to see what's making the headlines with The Sun's chief political correspondent, Jack Elson, and Sky's election commentator, Adam Bolton. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Well, the Daily Telegraph is reporting that Labour's manifesto will not rule out increasing taxes. The Times front page focuses on the Labour leader's pledge to make growth and prosperity a priority. The Mail describes Sir Keir Starmer as squirming during our programme and carries Conservative warnings about a Labour supermajority. And unsurprisingly, the Grimsby Telegraph splashes with tonight's event, picturing both leaders campaigning in the local area. Turning to tomorrow's Labour manifesto launch, The Eye says the party is planning a series of spending cuts across government departments and won't be making any new spending commitments across the public sector. The Guardian reports that Rishi Sunak's chief parliamentary aide, Craig Williams, placed a bet on a July election 3 weeks before the Prime Minister called it. He doesn't deny that he did it, but says he understands how it looks and will cooperate with any investigation. In other news, the Metro speaks to a man who was injured and whose partner and children died when his e-bike battery exploded, causing a fire. According to the Financial Times, the International Energy Agency believes the world's supply of oil will outstrip demand by the end of the decade, causing prices to drop substantially. In the Mirror, the mum of Nottingham stabbing victim Barnaby Webber has opened up about the family's hell since his death a year ago today. The Sun reports that England footballer Phil Foden and his partner have consulted a psychic ahead of the Euros. And the Star tells us that the England team will be given special dispensation to cover up at their German hotel's nude spa. Thank goodness for that. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined again tonight by Jack Elson and Adam Bolton here in Grimsby tonight. They've been here for our leaders event, the Battle for Number 10. Now going to take us through the papers, and we're going to start with, as we should be starting with, the Grimsby Telegraph. Adam, take us into their front page.
Well, their front page shows the two leaders arriving here in Grimsby, just behind us, in fact. And what's interesting, really, about it is that this was about two men, Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak, but as far as we know, they never actually met. They came in separately, they did their sessions before the audience separately. There may have been something behind the scenes, but they were very particular that they didn't want to meet. And so, really, that meant that people got to focus on them each individually rather than, if you like, the argy-bargy in a debate. And perhaps it ended up that they were both, a little bit more exposed than they have been in other encounters or at question time, for example.
And Jack, what did you think about that? That it was sort of, I suppose, less combative because they insisted on not meeting each other?
Yeah, completely. Obviously, different formats have different merits. One of the good things about this one for voters is that they couldn't pivot into an attack on the other. They couldn't take some flack and then sort of throw that back at the other person. Well, you say I'm doing this, but the other person would do it twice as worse. And so they were exposed with this. Obviously, the Grimsby audience tonight didn't disappoint. These are the exact type of voters that they are going to have to win over if they're going to be wanting to become the next Prime Minister. Obviously, went Tory in 2019 with Boris Johnson's massive landslide, was Labour for a long time before that, big Brexit voting area, fishing town. It's all the sort of things that Keir Starmer is desperate to claw back, and at the moment, it looks like he's probably going to do that.
And I've got to say, Grimsby gave it a really warm welcome, as we can see, cordoning off the area that was needed for this massive outside broadcast. A lot of people turning up outside earlier on when the leaders were arriving, demonstrations. So I think that, one should take one's hat off to Grimsby as well. And again, that's something different from all the other election events we're seeing. This really gave you a flavour of real people and the politicians.
They didn't go head-to-head, but Rishi Sunak, from my memory, did refer to Sir Keir Starmer. He hasn't got a plan for immigration. He's not saying what he wants to do. So he did try to make it combative, even though he wasn't in the same room with him at the same time.
Oh, yeah, he pulled no punches, He was often attacked on, taxes, migration, NHS. He is saying that Keir Starmer's got no plan to do it, playing into that sort of Tory playbook that Keir Starmer is playing it very, very safe. He's not prepared to really put his head over the parapet and say big, bold things that he would do differently. He doesn't want to rock the boat. On the contrast, Sunak, for the past few weeks, it's been a complete policy blitz. You've seen, national service, you've seen tax cuts left, right and centre, stamp duty cuts. The manifesto was a, festival of goodies and giveaways. Starmer, on the other hand, playing it much more safe. He doesn't want to rock the boat.
But it was interesting that it actually took a long time for the Prime Minister to get onto that attack. It was almost as if he sort of woke up for, I've only got 5 minutes to go, I better get the attack lines in. And even then, as Jack said, he didn't try and repeat this rather controversial £2,000 tax claim. He just said, generally, Labour will put your taxes up. I'm cutting them. And I think one of the most telling moments in his time was when Beth Rigby raised what Ed Conway had done, actually analysing the spending plans, showing that they're going up. And he basically pleaded the Fifth Amendment.
Yeah. Said he hadn't seen.
I don't know anything about that.
He hadn't seen the projections. Do you think he was a little bit... I mean, we'll have a look at the Sun front page. Grim evening, I think, their headline. Do you think the Prime Minister was a little bit subdued at the start of the debate, because the D-Day commemorations, that was mentioned fairly early on?
Yeah, and the polls show that this massive D-Day blunder, which he's rightly apologised for, has actually cut through with voters. And a lot of the time in Westminster, we can think that a row is dominating the country, whereas actually it's just pretty much contained within London. I think this was one of those moments where actually, wherever you are in the country, it really did cut through. It hurts, and I think Sunak has recognised that, and it was brought up today, I think twice, once by Beth Rigby and then once by a member of the audience, unprompted. It's clearly, it's clearly got him, very struggling at the moment, and I think that he's tried to neutralise that and put the row behind him, but it's just going to stay in people's minds. As much as you try to almost rip the plaster off early with that apology, it does something. It is something that's got to him, I think.
I think the worst moment for him was that lady, quite late on, who just said, "Look, I'm a Conservative voter, lifelong Conservative voter," but she actually brought up the parties as well under Boris Johnson. Then she mentioned D-Day, and she just said, "Look, I can't support the Conservatives right now." And I think, according to the opinion polls, she's speaking for quite a lot of people in this country at the moment. And, Sunak can only raise his hand. And, she even made the point that Rishi Sunak had actually got a fixed penalty notice for the parties, so she wasn't even letting him off the hook.
Do you think, Jack, that he simply can't get away from this now, and that really has been the turning point in the election campaign, that he can't claw back from that?
It's so difficult. If you look at the polls, they really haven't shifted since 2023, when he first became Prime Minister, or near enough anyway, And as Lyndon Crosby, the great Tory strategist, used to say, you can't fatten a pig on market day. He's been trying beyond hope to put radical policies in the minds of voters that he hopes will make them sit up and consider voting for him. The problem is that for so many of them now, they are just putting their fingers in their ears and they're not willing to listen. We've got 3 weeks to go until the election. Now, potentially, you might have some huge moment of significance that does something to shift the needle, but it's going to have to be bloody well big, because at the moment, they're not shifting at all.
And the most significant thing, as you say, Gillian, has been the D-Day business. To which he hasn't really got an answer. He just has to say, I apologise, I hope you've got in your heart to forgive me, which is, it's not a great way to be going into an election.
Yes, and with the D-Day commemorations, it wasn't a gaffe, it was a deliberate decision. I think that's what makes it very difficult for people to understand, and especially when he wasn't rushing back to do a live interview. It was a pre-recorded interview, played out tonight, incidentally. There didn't seem to be a real reason.
Well, actually complains in that interview that things overran.
Yes. Compounding it.
You could make the argument he was trying to be as polite, though, to his interviewer.
Well, he was being polite, but it's sort of revealing of his attitude, I think, to the whole
It's
thing.
uncomfortable in the context of what happened, definitely. I think a lot of people, and the fact we're still talking about it, obviously just goes to show how damaging it is to him. But I think that most people, when they saw the pictures on that beach, probably just thought that they just want to be there for that moment, 80th anniversary. For many of those veterans that stormed those beaches, it'll be the last time. And no matter what schedule you've got, you probably just feel like, no, actually, I have to be there rather than anywhere else, and that's why it's so bruising for him.
Just lastly on that, Adam, do you think we know the full story? Do you think that there might have been another reason that he had to rush back?
I don't think so. I mean, I think we know that this was discussed in advance, on the day, and afterwards. And on all occasions, he just simply felt he didn't need to be at that final international commemoration with the two presidents and the Prime Minister, the Chancellor of Germany, and it's just a misjudgment.
Let's take a look at the Times, page 6 and 7, the headline there from Sunak, "I'm doing my best." Jack, do you believe that the audience tonight thought that the Prime Minister was doing his very best?
Well, I think they gave him a fair hearing. Obviously, it's incredibly tough for him because he made lots of pledges when he first became Prime Minister. I think it was January 23. He made 5 pledges, and Beth Rigby, quite rightly, took him through all of them. Now, you can say that you've cut inflation. You can, how much credit you can take for that. Obviously, people will lay it at the door of the Bank of England a lot of the time. I think that's reasonable, but he's ticked that one. Growth. At the moment, obviously, you got a sort of a smidgen of growth last month, but actually, throughout his tenure, it has been pretty sluggish. And then you look at NHS waiting lists, hasn't made progress. Small boats, well, they're currently higher than they were last year, tracking higher, coming across the channel. And so it's very difficult for him now to come out and say, my record has been a stonking success, because as Beth put it to him, the numbers don't lie.
But he did sort of make the admission that he knows it's been tough for people. He can understand their frustration and their anger, but things are improving.
Yeah, but the problem is, when you say, I've done my best, the voters are at liberty to say, well, yeah, but it's not good enough. And that, in a sense, was the position which he was in, having to make the best of a grim situation, which it was quite clear, he wasn't the only one who had contributed to that. Although people did seem in the audience quite willing to personalise it, again, picked up on his support for Brexit and the consequences of it, which obviously in this area, which was heavily Brexit, blamed the European Union in part for the destruction, or in large part, of the fishing industry. But, when it came up, that question from Beth Rigby linking immigration and the increase in immigration to what was promised at the time of Brexit, the audience went silent.
There were gasps at some point.
They were persuaded.
There was a point there where Beth Rigby read out the numbers for the 3 years after Brexit. Net migration was about 1.9 million, a figure the PM didn't seem to know. And then the 3 years before Brexit, it was about 800,000. Now, many people in this area would have voted for Brexit, for one of the key pillars of it, which was to control migration and to control the numbers coming in here, using freedoms which leaving the EU afforded us. And the fact that the Tories, for 14 years, David Cameron, the tens of thousands, after that, Boris Johnson pledged to get it down, Rishi Sunak's now pledging to get it down again, people just don't believe them anymore on that. And they've pledged some big radical policy about a net migration annual cap. The problem is, for a lot of people, they just think it's too little too late.
Yeah, he did actually go a bit further, the furthest we've heard him so far, and gave a date for the first flight to Rwanda, didn't he?
Well, he's always been saying that it's going to happen and take place in July, but then, you know, the question came back to him, well, in that case, why didn't you wait for it to prove that this policy is working? I think, you know, we've seen another survey today showing that there's a great deal of scepticism about politics and trust. And, you know, you can say it now, but if you're saying it before it happens, people just don't seem to be prepared to take it on trust.
But he did, I think it was the 24th.
24th of July, yeah.
Is that the first time we've heard
It came out in High Court documents last week, but it's the first time I think he has openly admitted that that is exactly when he wants to send flights to Rwanda. Obviously challenged as well about the timing of the election and the timing of Rwanda flights, because the smart money in Westminster for a long time is that he would call an election in the autumn to allow time for Rwanda flights to get off the ground. He could then point to maybe some dip in numbers coming across the channel and could say to Keir Starmer, look, I have a plan to stop small boats. What are you going to do? Because you said you'd axe this on day one. The fact he doesn't, so the fact he didn't do that is seen by a lot of people as a tacit admission that potentially actually he doesn't think it would lead to a dip in the numbers, and then actually he would have egg on his face if that happened. Now, he's obviously committing to that doggedly, and he's still going into it, the election, with that Rwanda pledge. The problem is now is that it might never happen.
Adam, take us to the Mail. Keir Starmer, prospect of a super majority.
Now, this is actually very interesting because this comes out of an interview on the radio, I think it was on Times Radio, that the Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps, did this morning in advance of today's event. And he was saying, don't allow Labour a massive majority because it would be very bad for democracy. It's always bad when a party has a big majority. And that was taken by many people as being really a tacit admission that even someone as senior in the Conservative Party as Grant Shapps doesn't think they're going to win, and is now in the business of trying to talk down the size of the defeat of the Conservatives. And certainly a lot of the focus of Conservative policies have seemed to be aiming at that. Now, the message coming out of Conservative headquarters was, you know, Grant Shapps, you know, shouldn't have said this, overspoke a bit, even although they've been sending out advertisements putting out the same message. But now you're seeing the Daily Mail absolutely go for it and simply repeat what he said, that, you know, you don't want to create what they're calling a one-party socialist state. So we're seeing a real effort by the Tory supporting press, or the right-wing press, to frighten people, if you like, into not voting for Labour, which is different from voting for the Conservatives.
Yeah, he seemed to say the quiet bit out loud, Grant Shapps, and a lot of people in the party are thinking this is now an exercise in damage limitation, not something, as Adam said, that Tory figures out tonight in the spin room were keen to repeat. James Cleverly, Mark Spencer say, oh no, we still think we can win this. And I think that, I don't know about you, but I think that you have to carry on as if you can win it. You have to go out with a Richter's grin and kiss babies' foreheads and say, I can still be Prime Minister on July the 5th. Otherwise, everyone might as well just give up.
Well, exactly. I mean, it's not true. You know, they haven't won until they've won. And, you know, anything could happen in the next 21 days. So I don't think this is helpful, frankly, to put it out there. Although I have to say...
Adam and Jack, you can talk much more at the top of the hour. Thank you very much. Coming up next, Sky News at 11. It's 11 o'clock. This is Sky News' extended news review and press preview, live from outside the Grimsby Town Hall, the home of the battle for number 10. Sir Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak have pushed on the cost of living, the NHS, education and immigration.
The numbers are too high. Of course they're too high. What I can tell you is what I've done since I've had this job, and that's last year. Yes, and the numbers are too high. I'm not making any bones about that. The numbers are too high, Beth.
Well, nothing in our manifesto requires tax rises over and above those that we have specifically set out.
No tax rises in the next Parliament?
No tax rises needed in the plans in our manifesto.
In the plans?
No tax rises.
After questions from Sky News and from the audience, tax was one of the main issues tonight. We'll cut through what they said in our campaign check. We're in Grimsby, one of the key target towns of this general election campaign for both parties. Over the next hour, we'll be discussing today's news with our reviewers, Jack Elsom and Adam Bolton. And later, we'll have a full run-through of tomorrow's front pages. Good evening and a warm welcome to a special news review and press preview live from Grimsby. Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer have been trying to convince voters that they should get your vote in the upcoming general election. They've been questioned by audience members and by Sky's political editor, Beth Rigby, about tax, the NHS and immigration. Sir Keir Starmer insisted he would not be raising taxes to fix public finances. He also promised to sit down and negotiate with the NHS. Rishi Sunak acknowledged that people were frustrated over immigration numbers since Brexit, but did give a date for the first flight to Rwanda.